WSKID, Skid Row Radio.
You're listening to radio station WSKID.
So something happened the other day that really should worry you if you're someone who follows global politics and the ever-encroaching powers that our states are giving to themselves in these bogus attempts to, have security, fighting the war on terror, this kind of thing. We've already seen things like the Patriot Act and a myriad other developments that have incrementally increased the powers of our governments to really take away civil liberties and just becoming, a more encroaching kind of totalitarian, really, approach to global politics. What was worrying that happened the other day was the killing of al-Awlaki. Bit of a mouthful. This is a guy that supposedly had links to al-Qaida, was relatively central in that network, supportive of terrorist cells, this kind of thing. He was a US citizen though, and he was marked for death. He was targeted and killed by drone strikes by the US government. And this is unprecedented. This hasn't happened before. This is a new thing, okay? The US has never targeted one of its own citizens in a military strike before. On top of that, he wasn't actually charged with anything. There was no due process here. Innocent before proven guilty, this kind of thing. It's just one of those small concepts that supposedly gives us the standards that we're fighting for against these cave-dwelling Neanderthals, Anybody who's supporting this now has really lost sight of the whole reason it was supposed to be protecting our values in the first place, and that is that we're supposedly more progressive, this kind of thing. Of course, there's going to be some that are more honest about it and just balls out say, yeah, well, we're the most powerful, we can do what we want. That's fine. But if you're going to justify this on the basis that we've took out one of the bad guys, you're really missing the point and you need to go back to school. But just like the majority of the boogeymen in the war on terror and otherwise, this guy had previously had very close ties to the US government. He actually had the honour bestowed upon him of being invited for dinner at the Pentagon not long after 9/11. Bearing in mind that the US government, the CIA, did actually know that this guy was closely linked with those terror groups, and suspect that he may have had some knowledge of the 9/11 plot way before this dinner. It could have been a case of the left hand not talking to the right, or it could be a case of them just not giving a fuck, really. I mean, it's par for the course, really, that al-Qaida affiliates and other despots have been on friendly terms with the US government and Western governments in general, until they've outlived their use to us. We could go down the list. Bin Laden, trained by the CIA, al-Qaida, Mujahideen, trained by the CIA, used in wars against Russia. There's a long and illustrious list of guys that we've helped on the way to their despotery, and then hacked down when they've outlived their use to us. So, yeah, if you've learned anything from history, it's that the creation of a boogeyman should be scrutinised. And in this case, it's certainly another example of just absolutely no scrutiny being put on it by the people who are celebrating this extrajudicial killing. He was a US citizen. It should scare people that the US government are now targeting its own citizens based on their affiliations with supposed terrorist organisations. Now, this guy wasn't charged with anything. He was marked for death without due process, a US citizen. This should be scary to people, okay? Put aside what you think of his supposed, what you're being told about his links to terrorist cells. Put aside what you're being told about him and what you think about him, okay? The fact that this has happened in the way that it has, with no justification given, other than he's a bad guy, with no details of the actual attack, with no charges brought against him, this should be a scary motherfucking thing. He should not be celebrating it, but people are doing. So a pretty derpy fucking video was made on this by CobraJones. Thank God it's only a minute and a half long, so I'm going to try and get through it without too much pain. But yeah, here we go.
Someone that has betrayed a country has expressed a desire to no longer belong to that country. I think that in accordance with their desires, any person who either declares war against or has joined a group that has declared war against a nation should no longer be considered a citizen of said nation.
So the first mistake you really make there, Cobra, is that you're conflating nation with state or government, yeah? So, I mean, it's a product of indoctrination, and you've fallen prey to it 100%, it seems, and you really make the government's argument for it. You're out there doing the thing, telling people that this guy's an enemy because he was an enemy of our nation, therefore he's should no longer be considered part of our nation. No, he's an enemy of the government, of the state, of what they're doing. How can he possibly be an enemy of the nation of America? Okay, that's utterly fucking ridiculous on the face of it. The guy is obviously a political figure. Okay, these terrorist organisations are not fighting against the nation of America. They're fighting against the state, the government of America. The guys that have been responsible for MurderDeathKill for many decades in their homelands. You do miss that whole context out in your analysis. It's only a 1.5 minute video, so maybe if you're aware of this context, you just don't give a shit. But yeah, the creation of these terror cells, the creation of this anger, this hatred, is as a direct result of the actions of the state of America, the government of America, not the nation. You make that conflation, okay, and yeah, it's an indoctrination thing, it really is. It's a mind control thing that the politicians certainly use. He's a threat to us, he's a threat to our nation. But it's this conflation of nation and state which makes it a little bit difficult to argue against your really derpy video, Cobra. Because, yeah, it's something that not even, the founding fathers of America and the Constitution conflate. I mean, what was it Thomas Jefferson said? He said, "The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure." So, and your gun laws were in part installed in order that the people could rise up against a tyrannical or corrupt government, basically, yeah? So there were these bedrock foundations in place that the people should oppose its government when it was right to do so. It's just such a schoolyard argument, Cobra. You're basically saying if you don't want to be in our gang, then it's fine for us to throw poo at you, alright? You do qualify this later in the video that's saying it's not just about rhetoric or identity, it's the fact that he supported attacks on the nation of America, okay? But if that's the yardstick, if it's about the attacks, the violence, then why mention this whole "you're not part of the nation" thing anyway? The whole tone of your video is built towards justifying the extrajudicial, unjustified, without due process killing of an American citizen. That's what you're doing, you're justifying that by extraditing this guy ideologically, yeah? So if it's not just about the ideology, if it's not just about the rhetoric or the identity, then why mention it all? That is the whole tone of your video. I mean, later on you try and backtrack a little bit, or at least you try and give a caveat to say that it's because he supported attacks. Not because he was directly responsible for attacks that we can prove, but that he supported attacks. I mean, do you think that's going to take it a little bit too far? Not only was he not tried with anything, charged with anything, not only was he a US citizen, not only have we not been given details of the attack itself, okay, which makes you look a fucking fool for celebrating it. I mean, we do know that in the past in Afghanistan, a school was bombed, and this was justified that there was, terrorists in there. Would you still, do you support that? Do you support the bombing of a school because there may be a terrorist hiding in there? We haven't been given any details of this strike other than it was a drone strike. There could have been 5, 6, 7 families killed just to get to this one guy, who, by the way, was invited to the Pentagon for lunch not long after 9/11. Would you still support it then? You're a fool to be supportive of it when we haven't even been given any details. You're a fool to be supportive of it anyway, for the standard that it sets, the precedent that it sets.
In the United States, I'm not entirely sure, but I do believe that the United States law agrees with me there.
So you think that US law supports the idea that if somebody does not identify with the actions of that government, then they are no longer a citizen of that nation? Again, because you're conflating nation with state, this does make it a bit difficult to argue this point, but that's basically what you're saying, is that if you do not identify with the actions of a nation, state, government, then you're no longer a member of that nation. That's fucking retarded. But even if it was covered, just because something's legal doesn't mean that it's really helpful in terms of analysing the validity of that action, does it? I mean, slavery used to be legal, yeah? It used to be legal that women couldn't vote. It's still legal that torture is fine and dandy, and they're trying to extend that. They're trying to keep Guantanamo open indefinitely after we said that he was going to shut it down and made a big stink about how America doesn't torture. But Yeah, so just because something's legal really doesn't help us with analysing the validity of that in terms of a moral action. Okay?
Any person that declares war or joins a group that has declared war against a nation is an enemy of that nation.
Yeah, so here comes the caveats. So yeah, if you declare war or join a group that declares war on a nation, then you're no longer a part of that nation. Well, I think that's still a bit airy-fairy, isn't it? I mean, you could join a Facebook group that says, I heart the Taliban. Does that mean you're no longer a citizen of America? It's a bit of a grey area, isn't it? It doesn't really help as much, and it does kind of give over more and more power to the state to go after whoever they want, because as we've seen over the last couple of decades, they really have been quite sparing with the justification for going after certain peoples that themselves have been mighty chummy with in the past. Go down the list, like Gaddafi, bin Laden, this guy himself, Saddam Hussein. Take your pick. I mean, if you've learnt nothing from the last few decades, it's that we really should be sceptical of the creation of boogeymen. Okay, when somebody is targeted as a boogeyman, you really want to look at the history, and usually you'll see that he used to be quite chummy with the American government. Maybe even had tea at the Pentagon.
Now, this does not include people that wish to disagree with that nation, people that hold ideologically different views than a nation, or people who wish to peacefully change that nation. But rather, it means people that wish to destroy or violently change a nation.
Yeah, so there's the big caveat that basically invalidates the entire tone of your video. So the standard here is that if you declare war on or want to damage or bring violence upon a nation, that makes you basically be outcast from that nation. You're a valid enemy, valid target. If you are someone who either supports or is involved in violence against a nation. So this is where I feel like I have to remind you of a few things. First of all, when was the last time the US government's foreign policy was changed as a result of peaceful demonstrations? Second, have you forgotten why these terror cells exist? It's because of the violence on a massive scale, bestowed upon these places by the US government, okay? It is violence that they are reacting to. So you expect them to, take issue with that peacefully? Isn't that a little bit unfair? Yes, but you are very generalised here. You're not just saying it's about America, you're saying a nation. So it's any person who is supportive of violence against a nation is therefore, your argument goes, a valid target for extrajudicial, unjustified, without due process, murder, death, kill, yeah? And without any details given.
People such as those in al-Qaida. A nation is very well within their rights to neutralize, eliminate, kill, destroy, however you want to put it, its enemies.
So, you've got two choices here, Cobra. You either have to then realise that what you're saying here justifies every attack that's ever been visited upon America in the name of fighting its oppression of the Middle Eastern countries, yeah? Or you have to admit that you're just basically all about American exceptionalism and that it is one rule for you, one rule for everybody else. These are the two options you've got here. Because your argument that you're giving in this video is very generalised. It's a nation this, a nation that. So you apply that across the board, and yeah, it justifies every act of violence brought against America that we've seen from terrorist cells. Because they've all been very political in their rationale, their reasoning. We've had the videos, we've had the letters explaining why these attacks have happened. And it is because of the violence bestowed upon these nations by American governments and Western governments, yeah? So, yeah, you are justifying those attacks, an eye for an eye kind of thing. But it's not really an eye for an eye, is it? Because when you compare the two, when you compare the levels of violence, murder, death, kill, manipulation, destruction visited upon these two entities, there's really no competition, is there? Yeah? A couple of planes into a building versus the hundreds of thousands of deaths and untold destruction in the Middle East by Western powers. There's no real, it doesn't really, doesn't level out, does it? So, this conflation of nation and state, who are you to speak for the whole nation? Who is the government to speak for the whole nation? This is what they do. They depend upon idiots like you to take ownership of their actions and take ownership of the revenge visited upon them for their actions by our so-called enemies. Do you really think that if the US had just kept itself to itself over the last few decades and not been interfering all over the world, supporting coups, military coups, in placing dictatorships, manipulating nation building, bombing, all this kind of shit. Do you really think that if none of that had happened, we'd still be seeing these terrorist attacks? Do you think so? Do you think they'd give a fuck? No, I don't think they would be, would they? So, there's a context here, isn't there? It's not just that these boogeymen are out to destroy the whole nation of America just because they don't like the cut of our jib. This guy obviously was a US citizen, so that even that argument's a little shaky. But do you think they'd be declaring war upon America if none of that shit had happened? But let's run with your mix of nation and state. Okay, let's go with that for a second. So what you're basically saying is a nation, a state, a government would be well within its rights to fight the enemies of it, to fight anybody, to kill anybody who supports attacks on its nation. Yeah. So you would probably make the distinction that nations have a different sense of entitlement to be able to do this kind of thing than renegade groups, non-governmental cells, officially anyway. So would that mean that if the actual government of Afghanistan or the actual government of Iraq had attacked an American aggressor anywhere in the world that had been, bringing violence upon them, do you think that would be fine and dandy? That would be legitimate? You wouldn't have a problem with that? Because based on your argument here, you would not have a problem with that. That would be fine. You just have to accept it that, well, we had big act of violence upon them, so it was fair game. Really? Or do you think you support a complete annihilation of that state's infrastructure, military infrastructure, because of their retaliation? I think you probably would.
That is all.
Thank fuck, because it was only 1 minute and 31 seconds, but I don't think I could have managed much more of it. Holy shit. So to finish up, I should clear up a few things for you, Cobra. Of course, I don't sympathise with the methods of terrorist groups. I've tried to give you a bit of context as to why those groups exist and employ the means that they do, and give it some context of the violence that's begot upon those nations and peoples from our governments. But it's probably going to land on deaf ears, that part. So I'm just going to ask a few questions of you. First of all, do you also support the killing of the other people that were with al-Awlaki there? This drone strike supposedly killed 5 people. We were told that one of the other people that was killed and targeted to be killed was this second dude, Samir Khan. Now, Samir Khan was an editor of an English language al-Qaida magazine. So, I mean, do you think that he was a valid target as well? An editor of a magazine, a blogger basically? You think someone who was speaking out against America, and speaking violently out against America, do you think they're a valid target for a drone strike? He was an American citizen as well. I think you get into really dangerous territory if you say that he was also a valid target. But al-Awlaki himself, you have to prove that he was an imminent threat, surely. The US government has to prove that he was an imminent threat for this to be justified, even in your own eyes, let alone anybody else's. That surely has to be a yardstick. This guy had not been charged with anything. He had been accused of being involved with some failed terrorist attacks. Obviously he was very vocal in his support for al-Qaida and violence against America. But speaking out against a state, a government, however unsavoury it seems to be, surely that falls into free speech. You have to go a little bit further than just someone shouting death to America in order to, basically justify a drone strike killing him and 4 other people. But yeah, he was an American citizen, so was Samir Khan. Would you also have supported this drone strike, or basically this execution, if he'd been on American soil? Would you have supported the use of CIA and military, efforts to kill him on American soil? If you do, well, it makes no difference to me really, but I'm asking, would that make a difference to your position if he'd been on American soil and he'd been drone striked along with 4 other people? But I guess that's it. There is plenty more to say on this issue, but this video is already way too long, so I'll speak to you guys later. Goodbye.